First heard the story in a tavern on the edge of the empire, in a place where the wine was bitter and the shadows seemed to listen. An old veteran sat across from me, his eyes half blind from age, yet sharp with something else, memory, or perhaps fear. "They weren't dogs," he muttered, his voice barely louder than the crackle of the hearth. "Not really. Dogs don't remember every man they've ever killed." He was talking about the ghost cohort. In the heart of Rome's war machine, where legions moved like clockwork and every sword was sharpened for conquest, there existed a weapon so unusual it was almost forgotten in the official records. Almost. A specialized unit of war dogs, bred for brutality, trained for precision, and rumored to obey only the voice of the emperor himself. But the stories whispered among soldiers were different. They spoke of creatures with unnatural endurance, able to run for days without rest, of eyes that glowed faintly in the dark like coals in a dying fire, of wounds that should have killed them, yet they fought on as if pain itself was a stranger. The ghost cohort's first recorded deployment was during the siege of a Carthaginian stronghold. According to the official account, the gates were torn down by rams and the legions stormed the city. But the veteran in the tavern told it differently. "They sent in the beasts first," he said, his voice trembling. "I was on the ridge, watching. No horn, no orders, just silence. Then the howl started. It was like the night itself was screaming. The animals moved through the enemy like shadows with teeth. Soldiers fell without ever raising their shields. No one could tell where the attack began or ended. It was simply everywhere, all at once. When the Roman infantry entered the city hours later, they found streets slick with blood, but no bodies. Not a single enemy soldier remained. Only deep claw marks on stone and doors torn from their hinges. The ghost cohort had vanished before dawn, leaving nothing but silence and the smell of iron in the air. At first, commanders celebrated them. An invincible weapon, they called it. But soon, questions began to grow. Who bred them? Why did they never march with the main legions? And why were they never seen in daylight? The veteran leaned in closer, his breath thick with wine. "They don't fight for Rome," he whispered. "Rome just thinks they do." I tried to laugh it off, but something in his eyes made my stomach twist. As I left the tavern, I could swear I heard something in the distance, a low, drawn-out howl, far too deep for any wolf I'd ever known that I couldn't shake the veteran's words. For days afterward, they haunted me in the quiet moments, when the street outside my lodgings fell silent, or when the candlelight in my room flickered for no reason. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I found myself in the imperial archives, deep beneath the streets of Rome. The air down there was heavy, smelling of mold and old parchment. The scribes had long since retired, leaving me alone among the shelves of scrolls and codices. I wasn't looking for the ghost cohort at first. I was chasing a different rumor, something about missing soldiers and a legion that had vanished during a campaign in Germania. But as I traced one document to another, a pattern began to emerge. Every account was the same: a brutal battle, overwhelming odds, then silence. The enemy crushed, their numbers gone without trace. And each time, in the margin of the report, there was a small mark, an inked paw print barely the size of a coin. I found an older scroll, one not listed in the index, hidden inside a cracked leather case. The wax seal bore no imperial crest. Instead, it showed a snarling hound with eyes like suns. The text inside was difficult to read, the ink faded and the Latin archaic. It spoke of an experiment ordered by an emperor whose name was deliberately scratched out. It told of beasts made from war itself, bound not by chain nor loyalty, but by something older, something darker. According to the scroll, they had not been bred in kennels, but in temples, places the Senate had burned down to erase their existence. The priests who had created them were not dog handlers, but augurs, sorcerers of the old blood who mixed the spirits of animals with men. One passage made my skin crawl. "They shall hunger not for meat, nor for drink, but for the breath of the dying. And they shall know the scent of battle, as the vulture knows the scent of carrion." I closed the scroll and sat there in the dim light, my hands shaking. In the silence, I thought I heard claws scraping against the stone floor behind me. When I turned, there was nothing. But the smell of wet fur and rust lingered in the air long after I left the archives. The night I first saw one of them, the moon was a thin silver hook hanging low over the city, casting the streets in a brittle kind of light, the kind that seems to make shadows deeper rather than banishing them. I had been following a trail for weeks, piecing it together from scattered military archives, forgotten burial records, and whispered fragments in old taverns. It began with a series of unrecorded skirmishes along the Empire's outer provinces. Officially, these were nothing more than minor rebellions, inconsequential to history. But the reports that never made it into the official scrolls told a different story. Soldiers found with eyes frozen wide open, faces twisted as though caught in their last moment of terror, and wounds that did not match any blade or spear I had ever seen described. Each clue drew me closer to Rome itself, until the path led me to a lonely stretch of the Appian Way, a road older than most of the city, lined with tombs and broken milestones. There, among the ruins of what had once been a small guard post, I found something strange. The place was supposed to be abandoned for decades, yet the earth told a fresher story. Certain patches of soil were loose, turned over recently, as if something had been buried there, or unearthed. The night air was cool, but heavy, and the wind had died completely. That stillness carried with it a strange weight, as though the entire world was holding its breath. That's when I noticed the sound. At first, I thought it was my own breathing, slow, shallow, controlled, but no. This was different. It was wet, labored, ragged. A sound like someone trying to match my rhythm and failing. I turned slowly, lantern held out in front of me. The light caught the stone archway of the ruined post. Its edges blackened as though fire had once licked it. And then movement. It stepped into the fringe of my lantern's glow. My first thought was that it was a dog, a mangy scavenger that had made the ruins its home. But no dog moved like this. Its limbs unfolded from the shadows in jerking, deliberate motions, too long for its body, too flexible where joints should not bend. Its spine arched unnaturally, vertebrae rising under skin stretched thin and pale in some places, burned and blackened in others. And then I saw its face, two eyes like molten brass fixed on me, not reflecting the light, but generating their own, a smoldering glow from deep within, like the embers of some ancient forge. The gaze was wrong. It didn't look at me like prey, but as though I were an object, something to be measured, weighed, and chosen. It opened its mouth, not in a snarl, but in something horrifyingly human, a silent scream, its jaw unhinging further than any living creature should. No sound came, but I felt it all the same, a vibration deep in my ribs, as though the absence of noise was somehow louder than a scream could ever be. And then it was gone, not in the way an animal bolts. There was no movement, no sound of retreating footsteps. It was simply not there anymore, as if it had folded itself back into the shadows, slipping between one moment and the next. I stood there far too long, staring at the empty space where it had been, until the cold finally sank through my coat and into my bones. I should have left. I should have burned every note I had taken and buried the rest. But instead, I felt it, that pull, that unshakable compulsion to go further. Because whatever that thing was, it wasn't finished with me. And the part that frightened me most? Neither was the Roman camp lay under a moon that seemed unnaturally pale, its light stretching long, skeletal shadows across the ground. Tents flapped softly in the night wind, and the smell of oil, leather, and iron hung heavy in the air. The men whispered in small groups, sharpening blades they might never have the chance to use again. Somewhere in the distance, an owl cried, a long, hollow sound that made even the seasoned veterans glance at one another uneasily. Maxentius sat on an overturned shield near the central fire, staring at Ferratus. The great war dog was lying down, but his muscles were taut, his amber eyes fixed on something far beyond the camp walls. Occasionally, his ears would twitch, and a low growl would vibrate in his throat, though there was nothing visible in the darkness. At the far edge of the camp, 2 sentries stood guard. Maxentius noticed them shifting nervously, peering into the tree line as if something just out of sight was circling them. One of them muttered, "It's too quiet." The other gave a stiff nod. In war, quiet was rarely a gift. It was a warning. The enemy struck just before dawn. The valley filled with the thunder of drums, a rhythm that seemed to rattle the very earth. From the mist emerged an endless tide of barbarian warriors, shields painted with strange symbols, faces streaked in black and red. They moved with terrifying purpose, their war cries rising like a storm. The Roman horn sounded. Shields locked. Spears bristled in the morning gloom. The clash was immediate and brutal. Iron struck iron. Arrows hissed through the air, and the cries of the wounded filled the cold wind. The enemy was relentless, pushing with a force that threatened to snap the Roman line. Maxentius gave a sharp whistle. Ferretus sprang forward, his chainmail barding flashing in the light. He tore into the enemy's flank with the precision of a trained killer. But this was no frenzied attack. Ferretus fought as if reading a battle map no human could see. He avoided the strongest fighters and struck at the ones holding the enemy's formation together. When he brought one down, the line buckled and chaos spread. Men tried to spear him, but their blows seemed to slide away, as though their weapons passed through something other than flesh. Some swore that the dog's shape flickered, solid one moment, hazy the next. And then the whispers began. Roman soldiers on the front line claimed they saw other shapes moving with Ferretus. Shapes too large to be mortal hounds, their bodies clad in rotted armor, their eyes like burning coals. These phantoms moved through men as though they were mist, yet their bites drew real blood. By midday, the battlefield was slick with mud and blood. Against overwhelming odds, the Romans held their ground. The enemy fell back, leaving behind their dead and dying. But victory tasted hollow to Maxentius. He knew something had shifted. The other soldiers celebrated in weary relief, but he could not shake the sight of those shadowy forms. Ferretus did not pant or rest. His coat was unmarked by blood despite the carnage. It was as if the battle had never touched him. That night, while the camp slept, Maxentius followed his hound. Ferretus moved silently into the forest, deeper and deeper, until the sounds of the camp were gone. The path grew strange. Trees twisted into unnatural shapes, and the air grew heavy, smelling faintly of wet iron. Finally, they emerged into a mist-covered clearing. They were waiting. A dozen great hounds stood in a circle, their bodies a grotesque blend of bone and ghostly sinew. Pieces of ancient armor clung to their spectral frames. Corinthian plates, cracked Roman collars, even scraps of chainmail green with centuries of decay. Their eyes glowed faintly, and they breathed in unison, the sound like a deep wind moving through tombs. Ferretus approached them with slow, deliberate steps. He lowered his head in something like reverence. And Maxentius understood. Ferretus was not alone. He never had been. He was part of something far older than Rome itself, a legion that never died. The first real test of Cassius' war dogs came during the siege of Tigranocerta, deep in Armenia, where the Roman army was vastly outnumbered. The air was thick with the smell of dust and iron, and the Armenian war drums echoed like thunder across the hills. The enemy's cavalry, armored, swift, and deadly, had been tearing through the Roman flanks for days. Morale was breaking. That's when Cassius stepped forward. He didn't wait for orders. He gave them. His voice was sharp, like the crack of a whip. Release them. The handlers unclasped the massive iron collars. One by one, the war dogs surged forward, muscles rippling under their thick coats, eyes locked on the enemy with a hunger no man could imitate. Each wore chainmail crafted to their size, covering their chests and flanks, while jagged steel spikes jutted from their collars. The Armenians had never seen such beasts in war. Massive, disciplined, and utterly fearless. The first wave of cavalry laughed, thinking the Romans had gone mad. But when the dogs collided with their horses, the laughter turned to screams. A single war dog could bring down a horse, clawing at its legs, tearing at the throat, forcing the rider to fall into the chaos of the melee. The dogs didn't fight like animals. They fought like trained killers, coordinated and ruthless. The battle turned in moments. Soldiers who had been moments away from retreat suddenly charged forward, rallying behind the snarling wall of living weapons. And Cassius, walking just behind them, sword in hand, was like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of terror. But war is not without its costs. The dogs fought until their last breath, never retreating, never hesitating. Cassius personally buried each one that fell in battle, marking their graves with wooden stakes carved with their names. To him, they were not mere tools of war. They were brothers in arms. That day at Tigranocerta, the Romans didn't just win. They sent a message across the empire. These were not just dogs. These were Rome's deadliest soldiers. The night smelled of blood and salt. The Roman camp outside the ruined gates of Carthage was silent, too silent. Cassius moved through the rows of sleeping soldiers, his loyal war dogs pacing beside him, their ears twitching at every whisper of wind. They had survived battles that would have broken legions. They had crushed Numidian raiders, torn through rebel lines, and even faced the impossible, storms of arrows and rivers of fire. But tonight felt wrong. A shadow moved near the command tent. Cassius's hand went to his gladius, but before he could call out, a sharp whistle cut through the air. His dogs froze, not because they feared, but because the sound was familiar. It was the signal used by Roman handlers to call the war beasts back. Cassius's heart sank. From the darkness, his own comrades stepped forward, men he had fought beside for years. Their armor bore the same eagle crest as his, but their eyes were cold, faces blank. By order of the Senate, the centurion said, "You are relieved of command, Cassius Vero, permanently." It wasn't an arrest. It was an execution. The Senate feared him, feared that a man with a personal army of trained war beasts could challenge Rome itself. His victories had made him a hero to the people, but a threat to the politicians. Before he could react, a spear whistled past his head, grazing his cheek. His war dogs lunged forward with primal fury, tearing into the traitors, but there were too many. Arrows rained from the shadows. One by one, the hounds fell, their growls turning into whimpers that would haunt him forever. Cassius fought like a man possessed. His sword became a blur, his shield a wall of death. He cut down friends and strangers alike, his armor slick with blood, both theirs and his own. Finally, only he and his last dog, Brutus, stood surrounded. The centurion stepped forward, sword raised. "You should have known, Cassius. Rome loves no man it cannot control." Cassius smiled, blood on his teeth. "And I have never been controlled." With a roar, he and Brutus charged one last time, cutting through the line in a blaze of steel and teeth. The night swallowed them both, and in the years that followed, soldiers swore they sometimes saw a lone war dog prowling the ruins, his fur streaked with old scars, his eyes burning like embers, waiting for the day his master would return. Some say the ghost legion of Cassius still marches under the moon, their armored hounds leading the way. Not living, not dead, just waiting for Rome to need them again and to exact their revenge.